Now this is a party! I'm really feeling it!
Oh my god! Oh my god! Star Wars! Star Wars! What? Star Wars!
So, the new LEGO Star Wars game, in addition to apparently having a really deep set of combat tech for some reason, also has Adam Howden playing NPCs, one of whom says, "I'm really feeling it." This is very cool on quite a few different levels, so I think I need to explain, well, all of them. The first level is pretty simple. People who are Xenoblade fans are making video games. And it's not just neat seeing, hey, these people play good games, so maybe they'll make good games too, woo. It's just nice seeing that even if they weren't directly inspired by the series, people who like the same things I like get to make their own things in the same medium, even if that's not something I am likely ever to do. Yes, I know in a lot of Monolith Soft's own recruitment posts they say they want people who are fans of their games, and I'm pretty sure that could also just be, we want people who like our stuff so they won't disagree with upper management when they dictate how they want to make stuff in the future, but it's also probably just to recruit employees that already know what Monolith games are like and know the sort of thing they like to go for. The other major difference is of course that Monolith is a Japanese company. They're going to be recruiting people from Japan to make games in Japan. LEGO Star Wars is developed by Traveller's Tales, a British company, so this just shows that yes, the series does have a worldwide reach. And while I think it would be an even bigger deal if it was an American company developing it, because then it would have been the whole thing where we didn't even know if North America was actually going to get Xenoblade at all, and the UK obviously got the original localization like only a year after it first came out, it still goes to show that the series is much bigger than just its country of origin. The second neat thing only comes in when you start to see the sorta director's commentary for the reference. David Harris, the developer formerly at Traveller's Tales, now moving on to Deep Silver Downbuster Studios, a different British game developer, who put this reference in the first place, was actually the first person to post the video of it to the Xenoblade Chronicles subreddit, and in a comment says, "I worked on LSWTSS, abbreviation for the game title. When I heard that Adam Howden would be providing his voice to the game, I tried to work in a Xenoblade reference somewhere. I managed to get this one in on the last puzzle I worked on. I wasn't in the booth when he was recording, but I had an email from the script editor at the time. He said that Adam was initially unsure about the line, but after being told that it was the Xenoblade reference, he nailed it. He was happy to hear that it was indeed a Xenoblade reference." Now, I know the Xenoblade community is blessed to have several prominent VAs for the series who, actually like interacting with the fans and joining in the general memery around Xenoblade, but the fact that Adam Howden only agreed to do this once he learned that it was a Xenoblade reference is just another step above even that. And if you go to Adam Howden's Twitter, you see that he already tweeted out about that and was making jokes about it, and he even says that he wants to include an "I'm really feeling it" in every game he works on in the future, so Final Fantasy XIV 7.0, I'm looking for it. Is it going to be Pippin? Is it going to be Faffy? Is it going to be Arun Senna? I don't know. It should probably be all three of them. Another tangentially related funny is the fact that David Menken, aka Malos in Xenoblade 2, is actually the voice of Luke Skywalker in this game, and from what I've heard, he does a very good match for younger Mark Hamill. So, I mean, that's really funny, but not directly connected to really feeling it. Although, I guess he already does have experience wielding a lightsaber after playing Malos. Most important out of all of this, though, is the fact that a piece of Star Wars media has directly referenced the Xeno series, even if it was just an aside type thing and not an integral part of any of the story or something intended by the higher-ups in the development staff. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't want the references to go much deeper than this. Nintendo is already the Disney Apple of the games industry. I don't want them to get much closer to anything owned by actual Disney. However, Star Wars, as an IP, is incredibly important to the very existence of the Xeno series in the first place. To fully understand what I mean, I think we need to take a look at one of my favorite Xeno interviews of all time, which is the Iwata Asks with Tetsuya Takahashi for Xenoblade Chronicles 3D. As this interview is to advertise a re-release and not a brand new game, and in fact a re-release that Takahashi's Monolith team didn't do a whole lot of work on in the first place, most of the conversation is about the history and influences that led up to Xenoblade being a thing, as opposed to ideas and thoughts behind the game design itself. This is one of the very few places where official Nintendo media will directly reference Gears and Saga. The relevant aspect of the interview here is when Iwata says, "The worlds in the games you have created tend to have a sci-fi aspect to them. When did you start to cultivate those elements within yourself?" And Takahashi responds talking about a couple tokusatsu shows he liked when he was younger, and this very quickly turns into an entire page of the interview getting taken up by the two of them, who were only born roughly 6 or 7 years apart, talking about a ton of different sci-fi IPs, both Japanese and otherwise, that they liked when they were younger in the 60s and 70s. Takahashi talking about how his son calls him a Gundam otaku is funny and all, but the important part is where he says, "I also loved Star Trek and Star Wars." Now, the funny thing about Iwata Asks interviews is that they have footnotes for almost every single proper noun mentioned that isn't a Nintendo IP, so when Takahashi says he loves Star Trek, there is a superscript 10 next to Star Trek that brings you to a footnote that says, "Star Trek, a sci-fi TV series which aired in Japan under the name Uchu Daisuken. The show was produced in the US and broadcast in Japan beginning April 1969. Later on, a series of movies were produced." It is genuinely really funny and a little charming that whoever edited these interviews thought it was actually necessary to explain Star Trek in that much granular basic detail, but you might notice that there is no superscript and footnote for Star Wars, and that's actually because Iwata brings it up earlier on in the same interview. This is long but relevant, so I'm just going to read through the entire thing. Takahashi: "To be honest, we did anticipate that we would get a relatively strong response within Japan." Iwata: "So you must have had a solid feeling about its reception during development." Takahashi: "Yes, but the response from overseas was quite surprising to me." "How so?" "Most Western gamers like realistic games with high-definition graphics." Iwata: "Yes, they do seem to favor large-scale games that offer a lot of freedom." Takahashi: "So I was surprised that users who are used to that type of game bought and played our game." Iwata: "So you didn't know whether people who are used to playing that type of game would like a JRPG like Xenoblade Chronicles?" Takahashi: "That's true. I thought they might be tired of JRPGs." Iwata: "Oh, I see. The JRPG genre was able to attract game fans all over the world in the 1990s, but after that, gamers in the West didn't give soaring reviews to the genre like they did before, so you thought that they might not pick up Xenoblade Chronicles." That's right. But that didn't turn out to be the case. It seemed that fans in the West felt they were finally seeing the evolution of the JRPG. Why do you think that is? Takahashi: "Looking back, I wonder if it satisfied a craving they had." Iwata: "Perhaps the 90s game fans felt that the future of RPGs they envisioned was never realized, but that your Xenoblade Chronicles offered them hope for the future of RPGs." Takahashi: "That may be, and I think it was quite different from a Western-made game. One difference is that it did a good job of incorporating the innate heroism of JRPGs, allowing the user to become the hero, to become the protagonist. On the other hand, games made in the West, and this is only my personal opinion, they are very well made down to the last detail, but there's something stoic about them, and often the heroism aspect seems to take a bit of a back seat." Iwata: "The heroes of Western-made games do often look very strong." Takahashi responds, "Yes," and then Iwata continues, "But in JRPGs, the protagonists aren't very strong. They seem like people you could meet on the street who just happen to be born to a certain destiny, and are drawn by some force into doing things that they never could have believed possible. But if Westerners really didn't like that kind of story, Star Wars wouldn't have become such a hit, because that movie is just this type of story." Takahashi: "That's true. Also, I think the fact that I grew up in Japan's unique comic book culture had a big impact on the game. I was able to smoothly incorporate the appeal of comic books into the world of the game." Iwata: "Recently, Japanese comics have been quite popular in the West." Takahashi: "That's true. I think that people caught on to their appeal." Iwata: "Of course, I've also seen the strong reaction to Xenoblade Chronicles from people who love Japanese comics and anime. But that's not the only appeal." And then he goes on to ask other cultural influences, which leads into the sci-fi conversation. So not only is a very important figure in the creation and continuing existence of the Xeno series a fan of Star Wars, but you could also argue that the success of the original trilogy, which in and of itself took a lot of themes and ideas from Japanese media, is responsible for the later increase in Western fans of shonen manga and anime, and as such created a bigger potential fan base for a JRPG like Xenoblade that relies heavily on shonen themes and tropes. Now obviously Xenoblade 2 does that as well, and X didn't, but we're mostly talking about the success of Xenoblade 1 allowing the Xeno series to pretty much continue being a thing after 2010. Despite the whole shonen connection only coming in specifically for Xenoblade 1, That doesn't mean the Star Wars influence hasn't been felt on the series previously, as there have been plenty of very blatant Star Wars references in Xeno ever since Gears, so a Star Wars game referencing Xenoblade is more returning the favor than anything. Whether it's the opening of Xenogears involving the young protagonist whose home's just been destroyed and his mentor braving a sand people-laden desert to cross to a town that's full of crime to repair a robot, Xenosaga's parts being referred to as episodes, specifically in the most space opera-y arc of the Xeno series, all Monados basically just being lightsabers, or the full-on Jedi class in Xenoblade X, the influence Star Wars has had on the Xeno series has been blatant and very evident since the beginning, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's okay to show your influences on your sleeve if you do something interesting with them, and of course this channel wouldn't exist if Xeno wasn't an interesting series to talk about, so I think this is a really neat instance of things coming full circle, and a much bigger, much more well-known series that had an important part in making Xeno what it is, sort of giving back to it by having a reference to one of the memes it spawned decades later. Until next time, this is Luxon, signing off.